Welcome to Spill the Ink, a podcast by Reputation Inc., where we feature experts in growth and brand visibility for law firms and architecture, engineering, and construction firms. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, Michelle Calcote-King here. I'm the host of this show and also the principal and president of Reputation Inc. We are a public relations and content marketing agency for professional services firms, including architecture, engineering, and construction firms. We understand how sophisticated corporate buyers find and select AEC firms. For the past 10 years, we've helped firms grow through thought leadership-fueled strategies, including media relations, byline article placement, blogging, email marketing, video marketing, social media, and more. To learn more, go to rep-inc, that's Inc with a K.com, or email us at info@rep-inc.com. So our guest today is Matt Handal. He's the founder of Help Everybody Every Day. It's an AEC proposal training and consulting firm. Matt has helped numerous construction, engineering, architectural, and real estate consulting firms realize tens of millions in fees from projects ranging from $500,000 to $2 billion. Some of his clients have seen their win rates jump 10 times in a single year. He's the author of the book Proposal Development Secrets, an Amazon bestseller, and has been quoted in Engineering News Record and mentioned in the AIA handbook. Matt has submitted proposals in nearly every state, including Alaska and Hawaii, and trained thousands of proposal professionals around the globe. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you. That's it. That's me in a nutshell.
Well, tell me, I guess, give me some background. How did you end up becoming an AEC proposal expert and consultant?
Well, I started out by submitting proposals. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to submit proposals in, just about every state, so I know like the nuances of the different states and even as far away as Alaska and Hawaii. And that's unusual for someone in my industry, because typically when you work for an engineering firm or an architecture firm or a construction firm, it's very regional based.
Right.
So I got to see a lot of different things. So I was lucky in that sense. And I end up, as you mentioned, writing a book about, proposal development. And that was very well received.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I started training people. And there wasn't really, to be honest, even today, there's not a whole lot of training specifically for proposals.
Right.
There's kind of different schools. There's the what's known as the Shipley School of proposal writing and management. They have a whole process that they do, and that's probably the most famous one. But aside from that, especially when it comes to proposal management, there's very little training.
Yeah.
That help the thousands of people that do this for a living.
Right.
With their jobs. And so, I wanted to help those people.
That's great. Well, it's funny because too, most people who go into marketing don't think they're going to be doing proposals 24/7. I know when I started really heavily working with AEC firms, over a decade ago, I was surprised that this is what took up a significant chunk of time for many of these in-house professionals. And it meant that they really didn't have the bandwidth to focus on other, types of marketing. They were really just kind of doing those proposals. So I could see how there was a really big need for these kind of this kind of consulting.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You get out of college, maybe you have a marketing degree, maybe you have a journalism or public relations degree or an English degree, and you end up working for this engineering firm or this architecture firm. And next thing you know, here's an RFP, right? And this is what we do. We respond to these RFPs, and there was no book in school about how to do that, Right. And it's funny. I always mention this, that when you think about it, you think about all the engineering firms out there, all the architecture firms out there, all the construction firms out there, and assuming they have one person, each that works on proposals. And of course, someone like AECom has way more than that. Right. There are more people who work on proposals than there are dentists. Yet there are entire schools of dentistry.
That's a really great point. Absolutely. Yeah. And how it's sort of, it's the foundation really, especially for firms that are doing, a heavy amount of these larger projects. It's the foundation of what they're doing to win projects. So it's kind of critical. It's how they're communicating their differentiators, their services, all of those things. Because a lot of these AEC firms aren't doing any other kind of advanced digital marketing. Some of them. So let's talk about the state of proposals today. Like, what do you see in terms of kind of like the biggest areas for improvement? What's the landscape look like?
Well, I think that's a lot like asking, what's the biggest area of improvement for fitness? Because
Yeah.
really you have to take it on a case by case basis.
Sure.
For some people, it might be just like standing up. It might be the
right.
biggest improvement. For other people, it might be losing that last 5 pounds.
Gotcha.
Right. And I was just training a large civil engineering firm. And that's one of the things I mentioned to them. They were doing just about everything right, but really where they were at was that last 5 pounds. And for them, really, and for anybody really, that last 5 pounds is often the hardest to lose.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, so let's talk about then when you're training and working with firms, what do effective proposals do? What are some of the hallmarks of effective proposals?
Well, ultimately at the end of the day, the most effective proposals win contracts.
That's right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and as you mentioned, I've seen one firm in particular, 10x their proposal wins. And the next year they did even better. And I've seen firms go from like never ever being shortlisted to scoring first in their very next proposal. So a lot of it has to do with understanding like the game being played.
Okay.
You have to understand like what game's being played, how to play that game to win.
Right. Okay.
And that kind of goes into a much larger kind of strategy discussion. But sometimes just like some simple changes can drastically improve your proposals. For example, maybe changing up how you approach your cover letters might be part of that, improvement into your proposals. But again, it really depends on where you're at.
Gotcha. And so when you say kind of understanding the game, what aspects of it do you find a lot of firms aren't understanding? Are they not understanding how what the selection criteria are? Are they not understanding how the process works? Give me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think you have to understand how the decisions are being made. Let me give you a very good example. I can give you many examples. Let me just throw a couple at you. So a friend of mine used to work for a Department of Public Works for a large city in Hawaii, right? So he was like chief engineer, and they would have a committee that would make selections for these big construction contracts, right? And once they made the selection, that information went up to the mayor, and the mayor would either approve it or disapprove it.
Wow.
Right. So if that's the game being played, you really need to know that that's the game being played if you want to win.
Gotcha.
Got
it.
That's a kind of an extreme example, but another example that I think is interesting is, there are some selection committees that like Dallas. I know a friend of mine that worked for the Dallas Area Rapid Transit Authority, the transit authority out in Texas, and how they would do it is when she was creating a proposal, they would put her in a room. They would give her one proposal in the scoring sheet, and she would have to score that. She would knock on the door and get the next one.
Wow.
There are other entities where everybody goes off and scores the sheet. Then they go sit in a room and talk about it. Then they'll rescore the sheets to make it sure that it represents what they were discussing. And then they'll make decisions. So those small nuances are very important. There are other
Yeah.
groups that, like in the state government world, where in these proposals, often they'll ask you a series of questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or want certain things in each section of the proposal. So what they'll do is they'll have for lack of a better term, like the buyer, the person who has this need, right? To write down on a document, here's all the things they want to see in the proposal, right? And here's the questions and here's the answers they want to see. So they're asking you questions, and think about this as a consultant. If your clients ask you a question, they think they already know the answer, and they've written it down, and they're going to grade you on how close you are to that answer.
Yeah.
So that's another example of a game. Is like, you got to know how that game is being played. You need to know who you're playing against. If I'm walking into a basketball arena, I need to know whether I'm playing against a one-on-one game against my son, or against Charles Barkley, or against LeBron James, because those are different games. Right.
And so how do marketers get this insight? Is that something you're helping them to? So when you're saying, okay, you got to understand how these particular processes work, do a lot of these buyers, will they provide that insight up front? How can a marketer kind of learn what, especially if each one is a little bit different? How do you get those insights?
Yeah, you get it really from asking the right questions. When I go into a debrief, and so a debrief is like after you lose a proposal effort, right? You'll go in for a debrief.
Right.
Yeah. For example, I went Texas Department of Transportation. I went into a debrief, and I asked the right questions. And I've learned through that process that, oh, geez, how they do it is completely different than how anyone else does. And we were able to turn around and win like $1 million contract that next time go around, just because we understood how the game was being played. Therefore, we understood how to play the game. And that's a whole other story in itself. So that's, that's, again, you have to look at these things as, at the end of the day, this is a game.
Yeah.
It's a zero-sum game, often because there's one winner and the rest are losers. So you have to really, as much as we don't want to think of it like a game, as much as your clients don't want to think of it as a game, but at the end of the day, procurement is a game.
Yeah. Yeah. Is the debrief process really the only time that you can ask those questions to get that insight, or can you ask them up front, or is it really just in that debrief?
Well, hopefully you've done your research with the client beforehand. You're speaking to the client beforehand. So you can get some of this understanding of what the client, and what the game being played is, and also for lack of a better term, what the client's hot buttons are.
Right. Yep.
So a lot of people call that capture planning. So you got to do your capture planning too.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah, I'm a big proponent of a lot of strategy is asking good questions and being able to kind of navigate those conversations. So that makes a lot of sense. So tell me, when you're advising clients, what are some of the questions you're prompting them to ask?
Oh, geez, I have a whole list I have a course on proposal writing, and
okay.
And it is not just about proposal writing, as you kind of alluded to.
Yeah.
It goes from like, okay, how do you pick the right clients to go after? How do you get meetings with clients? Some of the most successful, or some of the things that people find the most success with my training is like, oh, wow, I was able to get a meeting with this client. So I teach them how to get meetings with clients, how to ask the right questions. One of my favorite questions is, if I was talking to you, I might say, Shell, let me ask you a question here. If you could fix one thing in your business by waving a magic wand, what would that be?
Yeah, great question.
Right.
Absolutely.
So that's
yeah, kind of gives you that what's keeping you up at night info.
Yeah, a lot of times with our clients, that this whole mentality of like, if I was to go to say someone at a large healthcare institution that's in charge of facilities, say, what keeps you up at night? Like I said, nothing. Nothing keeps me up at night. Right. But if I was to say, let me ask you a question. If you had a magic wand, and you could change one thing, fix one thing about your construction program, what would that be? Just out of curiosity. They'll have an answer for that.
Yeah. Got it.
And part of that goes to like how we talk to essentially engineers. You can't go to your engineers and be like, so what's our differentiators here?
Right. Yes. And I have been in meetings with marketing people who do that, or say, what do you like? I sat in on a meeting one time with a web development company and an AEC firm, and they said, well, what do you want to them? And I thought they don't know what, like the broadest, worst question possible. So
how do you want them to feel when you see this website? Like, what emotion do you want?
Right. Yes.
You say that to an engineer, they're just going to look at you like you're insane.
Yeah. Right. What are our differentiators? Yeah, that's great. So the other thing I saw, when looking through all of the fantastic content that you put out, is that you also talk about not just how to write good proposals, but also how to manage the process. Can you give me some? Tell me why does the process often need improving? What are some things that you're helping firms do to better manage that process?
Yeah. So here's why the process needs improvement. So did you take violin in college? Did you take concert violin when you were in college?
No. No.
Well, I didn't take proposal management in college.
Right.
And nobody else did, as we spoke about. So imagine, you graduate college and the first day of your job, someone drops a violin on your desk and expects you to play a concerto. Well, you're going to be like, I've never done this before. And they say, well, hey, listen, around here, it's sink or swim. Right. In this orchestra, it's sink or swim. So, you're just going to have to figure it out. If it helps you, here's what the last person did. They plucked some things. They had this bow thing and they rubbed it on the instrument, and then that's kind of where people are left. And you're not going to play it perfectly in 6 months or a year. And it causes a lot of frustrations with, people saying they fall into this victim mentality. And to some respect, they are victimized because they weren't trained. But if they were trained properly, they wouldn't fall in as much into this victim mentality of like, okay, and you may even have heard this before. I was talking to this lady years ago in Austin. She worked for an architecture firm, and she was saying she was having the standard complaint of, we assign the technical experts to write these sections, and it's due on Thursday, and now it's Monday, and I still don't even have it. Right. And I asked, well, how did you determine who to give this to? Well, whoever was available. Well, how did you determine whether they were available or not? Did you look at timesheets or projections or something? No, we just walked around the office, and whoever looked available, we just gave it to them.
Yeah.
And did you just like tell them that it was due on Thursday? Here's this thing due on Thursday. Yeah, that's basically it. Well, of course you didn't get it on Thursday. Right. If you gave that to me and did the same exact thing to me, you wouldn't have get it on Thursday either.
Yeah. So absolutely.
So that's a whole, and it's not their fault. It's just no one ever taught them the right way to do it, the right way to approach it. Yeah. What to say in a kickoff meeting, how to even schedule a proposal effort. Nobody ever teaches you that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of training. Unfortunately, people just don't get. They just get the violin, say, hey, play a concerto. And let me tell you, there are people, I can name many of them, that, after 10 years, they can play a mean violin. Right? But man, those first 6 months, that first year, and sometimes if you don't, when you play an instrument, if you kind of teach yourself, and then somebody, and then you meet somebody who is very good at that instrument, they might show you a trick or two that you'd be like, oh wow, I didn't realize that. It might change completely the way you play.
Yeah.
So there are people that can learn how to play the violin ultimately at the end of the day, but there's a lot of pain and frustration that between getting that violin in your desk and being able to play the concerto.
Yeah, I can't imagine asking. So we don't do proposals, but we do a lot of content for AEC firms. And I can imagine that's similar to me, like assigning an engineer to write me a blog post. Personally, I wouldn't do it because what I would get back would be ineffective. I probably wouldn't get it back. So I can imagine it's much of the same. You really have to get that information in a way that is going to kind of actually give you that effective content.
Yeah, and like when I used to do that, my engineers would do webinars, right? And I would just record that webinar, and then from that webinar, I'd come up with like 6 or 7 blog posts from that webinar.
Yeah.
Now they'll do that. They'll talk about, engineers particularly will talk about what they do. You can't get them to shut up about it once you get them going.
Right. But writing is
a blank piece of paper.
Yep.
That's
completely different.
That's like giving them a violin,
Exactly. Yep. That is very true. So, are there trends right now in the proposal world? Are things changing in how clients are asking for information, or what's changing?
Well, I would say that's probably more remote now. I think that even the shortlist presentations, a lot more of them are being done remote now. The people who are typically working in proposals in an office, like some firms, like you might have a large firm that has a centralized proposal team, right? So like their team in Chicago does all the proposals, even if it's in Florida, right? And those people work together in an office environment, right? But obviously things have changed as far as COVID and all that. So I think that people are learning to do that more remote now, which I think has its ups and downs to that, from what I hear. Even I was working on a proposal for somebody during this, COVID stuff. And, I would drive to their office and have conversations with them, and to walk through the proposal as we were going through the final stages of it, because even with the technology we have today, I feel like it's better to do it face to face sometimes.
Yeah. Understood.
Have the tough conversations that sometimes you need to have.
Yeah.
In a face to face environment versus a virtual environment. Unfortunately, sometimes you're stuck with what you can do.
Yeah.
But I think people are trying to do it, or trying to find a way to make it work more remotely.
Gotcha. Yeah. And let's talk about the importance of just good writing. How much does that really impact, the success of a proposal, if it's well written or not? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, you can get Stephen King or Maya Angelou to write your proposal, but that doesn't mean you're going to win more.
Right.
Right. And there's really more to it than that. So again, understanding the game that's being played is a part of it. Understanding the client is a part of it too, and being able to respond to what's being asked, which is always a challenge for some people. So what happens is a lot of times in proposals, unfortunately, we somehow got the impression that our clients are stupid. So they'll ask us something like, they'll ask a construction manager, they'll say, what's your process for avoiding and resolving disputes and disagreements between the contractors and designers. And typically the construction firm or the CM firm would say this. They'll say like, well, we work with all the local designers and all the local subconsultants or subcontractors, and we've never had a problem with them. And in fact, every single one of the principals of these design firms are the godfather or godmother of my children. And every Sunday we sit around the campfire, we roast marshmallows, and we sing Kumbaya. That's how they answer it.
Yeah.
But really that's not answering the question. And the reason they're asking the question is because they're not stupid. They've been on a construction site before.
Yeah.
They know that things can get heated between a designer and the contractor, especially with RFIs, flying around, so it's just stupid to answer it like that.
Right. To say there's
they're
no
asking
conflict.
what process do you have? So you better have a process.
Yeah. No, that's good insight. That's great. I also saw you talking about whether non-technical people can write technical proposals. And again, this has similarities to the work we do, which is on the content marketing side, where you'll have people argue that a non-technical person can't write, a piece of content. So tell me the advice that you give to your clients about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you could really understand this because I once suggested, well, we can just hire like a writer to come in and like kind of ghost write an article for you if you talk to them. I was laughed at. No, you can't get what's in my brain. Only I can write.
Yeah.
And that's, I was the one that probably should have been laughing because that's just a stupid notion, really.
Right. Exactly.
So, you could write a technical approach, yes, but not in a bubble.
Right.
For example, I could walk you step by step on how we mentioned proposal strategy. I could walk you step by step on how do I determine the strategy for a proposal. And I think you could listen to me and write down what I said in a way that it would make sense.
Absolutely.
And that would be probably a lot quicker than if I was just to look at a blank piece of paper and just kind of write down, how I think about strategy. So that's the approach to use. I don't know if you, here's a $1 million tip for you. And I don't know if you use something like this, but I use something called the LiveScribe Smart Pen.
Okay.
This one's called the Echo. And you have a special notebook. And what it does is it records what people are saying as you're writing. So what I find is engineers and architects, they talk faster than I can write.
So it's actually getting an audio recording?
You get an audio recording of, and so if you wrote a word, and for privacy reasons, I can't show you exactly right now, but you could click on a word and hear what was being said at that very moment that you were writing that word.
Interesting.
So something like that, if you're working on proposals, is absolutely invaluable. If you're working with anybody on a technical standpoint, that is invaluable. And I think it's not a very popular device. I don't understand why it isn't. But, it should be.
Well, it sounds like what I'm hearing, your philosophy to proposals is very similar to mine with the content marketing, in that really the skill set that makes a difference is the ability to collect good information. So it's less good writing is important, how you present it, all that, but it's that ability to ask the right questions at the start and know when you've got the information that you need, and be able to navigate those conversations with more technical professionals to get to the kinds of insight that you need in order to then put it all together.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. All the things that you just said.
Yeah.
Ultimately, yeah. I mean, I think what people would, if they were to push back, they would say, well, geez, if we made it too easy on the technical folks, they just go after everything. Right. Okay. So sometimes people are hesitant to do that. I think sometimes people are, I've heard a million times where, well, geez, I wish I was as smart as them. Then I would know what to write. Well, it's not a matter of
No. Yeah.
Smartness. I mean, we're both, my belief is, and I always tell my kids, there's no such thing as smart.
Mm-hmm.
We're all born with a brain,
Mm-hmm.
right? And unless that brain gets damaged in some way, or
Yeah.
there's some sort of defect in that brain, everybody's pretty much the same. It's just a matter of what you put in that brain. So yeah, they went to school for engineering and
Mm-hmm.
they did all the engineering stuff, or
Mm-hmm.
you went to school for something else and you
Mm-hmm.
did this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you had spent all the time learning what they learned, you would know what they knew. And if they spent
Yeah.
all the time learning what you knew, they
Mm-hmm.
would know what you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's that's all it is. So we shouldn't have this, feeling of that they are somehow mentally superior to us, because I could tell you for a fact that they're not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think in my opinion, it's educating yourself enough to know which questions to ask, and to have a good idea of when you've gotten to that point you've gotten the information you need to be effective in your whatever persuasive piece that you're creating, whether it's a proposal, blog post, article, that kind of thing. So, um, uh, here's the other question or thing I've wondered is, how much do firms need to invest in how they visually present these proposals? Is that, I can guess your answer, but I'd like to hear you talk about that, because I could imagine a lot of marketers are thinking more about how do I like visually put this together? How important is that?
Well, there's graphics and there's what I would call page layout, right?
Mm,
So the purpose of a graphic, when you put a graphic into a proposal,
mm-hmm,
really, if you put a graphic to any sort of thing, the purpose of that graphic is to get their eyes on the word. Because
mm-hmm,
at the end of the day, it's the words and the numbers that are going to
mm-hmm,
win you contracts.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
So the purpose of that graphic is to get somebody to look at the words.
got it. Yeah,
So the
right.
idea, like sometimes people in the proposal world will have this like rule of thumb, like, oh, well, each page has to have two pictures, or two graphics,
Wow.
and they'll just like throw in
Yeah,
whatever, and
yeah,
that doesn't really help you,
yeah.
especially if you have page limits. The next issue is you got page layout, and that's more of like an
Mm-hmm,
Edward Tufte kind of thing. Like
mm-hmm.
how do you display this information in the best way for the reader to consume?
Yeah.
And I always talk about like proposal math and like how many words fit on an 8.5 by 11 page at 10-point font. Well,
Mm-hmm,
the kind of the joke is, I'm wearing glasses. I think most of the people that are evaluating your proposals, they're not like 19,
mm-hmm.
right? They're probably in their 40s, maybe their 50s, and maybe their eyes aren't as great as they used to. So that is like 8-point fonts, 8-point, fancy Arial, sans serif font, is just not helping them out. It's not helping them read
Mm,
it. So if you're making it difficult for someone to read, that's
mm,
super problematic. Now, I
right.
have a proposal
Yeah.
template that and I believe everybody should have a proposal template that you start from. And what I like about my proposal template, and this is something I give away in my course. It comes with the course, my template that I use. It forces you to think.
Mm,
It forces you to think
gotcha.
about, why is this person perfect for this job?
Mm,
Why is this example project, just like their project?
mm,
Where if you're just throwing information in, you don't really think it through about like what's the best way to provide this information.
mm-hmm.
What's the best way to highlight stuff. That can be
Gotcha.
problematic. So as far as
Mm-hmm.
graphic design, yes, you absolutely do have to have. I think people put sometimes a little bit too much weight on it if they're not
Mm-hmm.
focusing enough on like answering the $1 million question. And the $1 million
Right.
question is, what would this client miss out on if they choose anyone but us?
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
not an easy question to answer.
Yeah.
So if they say, okay, let's spend 6 hours on the cover
Mm-hmm.
and 0 seconds answering that question, the $1 million
Mm-hmm.
question, that's a mistake, because nobody ever said, you know what, these guys, I didn't like their approach. The price was a little high. Their people were like just so. But as soon as I saw that cover, I knew that I should give them that $1 billion.
Yeah, that graph, man. Yeah, exactly. That, that's very true. I think there are some marketers sort of just get lost in that detail, and don't realize that 80% of it is more about getting to that meaty differentiators and communicating that, and then graphic design's that 20% that helps you communicate that information better. So
I was just talking, not to interrupt, but I was just talking to a president of a large engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, Matt, a lot of times our engineers will get a competitor's proposal and say, hey, we want ours to look just like that.
Mm.
Our proposal should be just like that.
Right.
And like, that's the worst thing you can do, because you want to be you want to differentiate yourself. And at the core of differentiate is this word different.
Right.
So different is better than better.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be just like everybody else. You want to be different.
Yeah. Great. I also noticed in some of your blog posts that you do help firms with the GoNoGo process. Can you tell me a little bit about how you're helping firms with that? How are you helping them improve and making those decisions?
Well, I don't think anyone really brings me in to specifically help them make go-no-go decisions. A lot of the time, especially with the bigger firms, they have a process. There's many go-no-go forms that you can get your hands on. There's one in this book called The Magic of Winning Proposals that you can get on Amazon that has a decent form in it. So, but what I do suggest people do is ultimately to use your own data to figure out. You can't just have a form and say, okay, we're going to use this form, and maybe you find better results with it, but how can you fine tune that form to make sure you're getting the best results out of it? And ultimately that has to do with your data. How I would look at it, how I typically would look at it, is proposals cost money. So in my experience, you're not getting a proposal out the door, a response to an RFP out the door, without spending a couple $1,000s at the end of the day. So you got to look at it from, in my opinion, the standpoint of, for every dollar we spend, how many dollars are we getting back? Return on investment, right? So I would look at, can I single out one or two attributes or scenarios that if scenario A is in place, what is our return on investment on money spent?
Yeah.
If scenario B is in place, what's our return on investment? So for example, when I worked for a firm in Philadelphia, I looked at this, I did this. And what I found, which was interesting, was that if the client knew who we were, if they simply knew who we were, our return on investment for proposal dollars spent was phenomenal. They simply knew who we were.
Right? Interesting.
And I don't think that that's going to apply to every firm.
Right.
With our data, that works. But for somebody else's data, that might not be the scenario.
Got it. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you so much. This has been a really interesting conversation. And so if you can, for the audience that's listening, if you can tell us where people can go to get more information, but also tell us about the different training courses that you offer if they're interested in learning more about those.
Well, the first training course I always suggest people do is what I call a free proposal crash course. You go to my website, helpeverybodyeveryday.com. Sign up from that. From that, you kind of can learn about the other courses. I have a course on proposal management. I call it Proposal Management Mastery, and a course on writing called Win Writing. And typically, I only open those at certain points in time to certain people on my lists. But you can, on my website, you can go and learn more about those courses. But typically, you want to do that crash course first. Thousands upon thousands of people have gone through the crash course and they find it very helpful.
That's great. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Spill the Ink, a podcast by Reputation Inc. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.